Good morning to those, or good afternoon, to those who are joining us right now. I'm just giving everyone another few seconds before we start as people are slowly coming into the room. And I might get started, and we might have some more people joining us slowly. Welcome everyone, and good morning, or no, indeed good afternoon, depending on where in Australia or the wider region you might be watching this from. My name is Katarina Wolf, and I have the great pleasure to host this morning's Rescom webinar. This month, Rescom webinar, really. Look, this webinar is particularly special because October is our project month, and that's what was formerly known as Research Month. So it's really one of my favourite parts of Rescom because it allows us to showcase some industry-based as well as some academic research and bring it all together. And that's exactly what we get to do this month, which is absolutely fantastic because we're going to start off with an industry-based presentation, providing an insight into a really thought-provoking and inspiring project. And then we're going to follow with a scholarly project after that. And even better, as you will notice, both of these are actually quite nicely connected and will allow us to reflect on very recent events that have had an impact on all of us. So the way we'll be running it, given that we've got two presentations this month, we're going to divide the hour-long spot we've got into two halves. So we're going to be starting off with Vanessa Leal and Joanna Cox, who are going to talk about the Trans-Tasman Women's Leaders Study Tour. And then we're going to have some time at the end for questions and Q&As. And please keep them coming. Please put your questions in as we go along via the chat and the Q&A function. And then during the second half, we're going to hear from Shemus Sanil from RMIT University, who's going to talk about corporate social responsibility advocacy by Australian universities around the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speakers. We've got Vanessa and Joanna Cox. Vanessa is a strategic communications and corporate affairs professional with over 25 years of experience in corporate affairs, agency leadership and entrepreneurship. And as the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of HERT MSL, Vanessa led one of Australia's largest and most awarded public relations agencies for more than a decade. And in 2017, HERT MSL was acquired by Publicis Group, joining one of the world's top 5 advertising networks. And Vanessa has since co-founded corporate advisory Horizontes in 2022 and sustainable creative agency We Think Everything. Vanessa is going to present together with Joanna Cox, and Joanna Cox, the executive for operations in the product and technology team at Telstra. Product technology operations include planning, business operations, risk and compliance, and product excellence, as well as architecture and simplification. And previously, Joanna was Telstra's Chief Risk Officer from 2017 to 2021. Without going further into the most impressive background these two ladies bring to this morning's presentation, they're both, as I've flagged, going to talk about the Trans-Tasman Women's Leaders Study Tour and the connection to the voice of Parliament within that context. So I'm handing over to Vanessa and Joanna.
Thanks so much, Katarina. Thank you so much for having us today. Jo and I are going to share our experiences from the Trans-Tasman Women Leadership Study Tour, both in terms of what we learnt on that tour, but also how it applied to industry within our businesses and also to community work that we have carried through. I do have a presentation that I will put up. We will run through for about 15-20 minutes and then open to questions on that. So the Women's Leader Study Tour is an initiative of a industry body called the Trans-Tasman Business Circle. And we embarked on this tour in May 2023. The tour was the 4th of this initiative since 2019. So the purpose of it is to bring together women leaders from really diverse backgrounds and foster a sense of community, education, learning and progression. Our tour was hosted by Anne Sherry AO, who is a very accomplished businesswoman, non-executive director and leader within the Australian community. We had 65 women join the tour from very diverse backgrounds, so from government, from corporate, from non-profit and small businesses. And the tour was very condensed. It was 7 days in Uluru, in Sydney and in Canberra. The theme of the tour was innovation, sustainability and the voice. And the purpose of the program was really an experiential program to be able to meet various leaders from those themes, to be able to be on the ground in communities to really see how innovation, sustainability and reconciliation was happening in practice, and probably most importantly to learn together, so to bring some really diverse people together, women together, with very shared motivations for achieving that learning, and in a very condensed period of time have access to that information. So the themes really underpinned everything that we did, and it was very much looking at the vision of what Australia could look like in the future. So the theme of it was reimagining our future, and you can see here the risk is that we don't change. So provided us an amazing platform to learn, to collaborate, to be with like-minded people, to go and see some of our country in a really different way, to consider business, economy, government, and also, importantly, cultural parts of our country. And very poignant this year when we undertook the tour in May in the lead up to the referendum of the voice to Parliament, our chance to be on the ground somewhere like Uluru and meet with the communities there, and to be able to have first-hand exposure to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the issues that they're facing, and the conversations that we were able to have was transformational, I think, and important in that year. So in terms of a really brief overview of the things that we did, we spent 3 days in Uluru. We met with the local Mutijura community. We met with the elders, with the women, and we were really fortunate to spend the 3 days with Professor Megan Davies from the Uluru Dialogues, and also Sally Scales, who's an Indigenous leader from the area as well, who were extremely generous in taking us around their country, sharing their culture, sharing their point of view, and also spending time with us over a quite intensive 3 days to enhance that experience. We left Uluru and came to Sydney, and you can see us here at the Commonwealth Bank offices. So quite a transition within a couple of days to get into our suits and into the formal gear, and have presentations from a really diverse range of businesses, from corporates to startups to academics to thought leaders, on issues related to innovation, so disruptive change, net zero, fostering diversity, humanising the workforce, modern slavery, and amplifying the voices of young people. So they were short presentations followed by workshops, discussions. We had some formal lunches and dinners, and really a very intensive time to be able to communicate together and take being from the outback into the city and start to think about that design. And the final part of that study tour was down in Canberra. We're right near Parliament House. You can see Anne Sherry, our leader there, enjoying the sunshine and the view. And we took another view at really what the role government plays in reimagining our future. We were fortunate to meet with a diverse range of politicians, with the Teals, and also one of the leaders on our tour is Sam Mostyn, AO, who most recently was in the news this week around her Women's Economic Equality Task Force that was presented at the federal budget, and the final report was presented this week. And Sam spent some of that time in Canberra just sharing the work that she'd done on diversity and women's inclusion. So they were the highlights of the tour. I'm going to hand over to Jo to share a bit about some of the things that we learnt and what that meant over these slides.
Thank you, Vanessa, and I just echo my thanks to you all for having us here today. Going on the study tour was a had much more impact on me than I had expected, and so I'm super happy to share that with you all today. So I'll just briefly touch on my learnings from the overall tour, and then I'm going to go in and spend quite a bit more time talking about what I then did with that back at Telstra, because we wanted to share with you all how the learnings from such a personal trip can then obviously impact work and then the rest of Australia. So my favourite takeaways on innovation and sustainability, I'll share briefly before going into talking about the voice. On innovation, I've had various roles over my life that have touched on including innovation, but the light bulb moment for me that I had was learning that there is a very small deep tech innovation sector in Australia, which I hadn't quite appreciated. I have a science background, so I kind of was pretty happy to hear that we are managing in Australia to commercialise more deep tech than I had appreciated, and so I'm interested in getting closer to that innovation in Australia. And then on sustainability, I like to think that I'm a long-term thinker, and don't get driven by quarterly business targets, as some of my colleagues at Telstra might do. But the key takeaway on sustainability is that we need to start thinking a little bit like some of the Indigenous cultures around the world, including Australia's, in the terms of 7 generations as a marker for sustainability. If we're not thinking ahead 7 generations in terms of the impact that our actions might have now on them, then we're not taking a longer term enough view on things. And we're starting to do that with climate change, but that's quite a different mindset to bring to some decision making. I also personally really enjoyed being in different locations around Australia. I live in Sydney, so for me, Uluru and Canberra were obviously the most interesting locations, but just being away out of our day-to-day lives and families for 7 days with this group of like-minded women, as Vanessa said, was an excellent way to learn. I'm an experiential learner, which is why I wanted, honestly, I don't read enough books and articles, but if I spend a week thinking about things in the context where I remember the experiences I have while I'm learning and I'm discussing it with other women that I'm with, then I'm much more likely to remember. And then I'm always reminded when we go into regional and remote Australia how important technology is in remote communities, and you can just never miss that, the impact that Telstra, I'm obviously proud to work for Telstra, has in bringing connectivity to regional and remote communities so that everyone can thrive, which is our vision. And then finally, the insights from diverse organisations. Obviously, I spend all day, every day in Telstra, where we've got a lot of diversity, but hearing input from government and independent organisations, people like Vanessa who have their own business and work in a very different sector to me, was excellent, but also hearing what the other big corporates are doing in a slightly more informal setting than the way that we normally interact with each other was pretty valuable. So those were my overall learnings, and I might, Vanessa, if you go to the next slide, kind of then double click on what it means for the voice. So even though I had takeaways on sustainability and innovation, my personal commitment to myself at the end of the tour was I wanted to support the movement around the voice referendum. I'll explain a little bit more about why in a minute, but while I was in Uluru and Canberra, my brain was exploding with ideas on how Telstra could help. And there were kind of 2 avenues. One, I wanted to help educate staff at Telstra around the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And the reason for that is I take my leadership role at Telstra as a privilege that I can influence the 36,000 people that work at Telstra, which is obviously a much bigger network than I personally have. So if I can find a cause and then find a way to influence Telstra staff on something, then I can have a much bigger impact on society than I do through my own influence. And so I really wanted to help with educating. And then I also wanted to help convince Telstra, even though it's not my job at Telstra, to support the campaigns in the lead up to the referendum in some practical ways, using lots of capabilities that I knew that Telstra had. For example, I knew they needed office space from the conversations with Professor Megan Davis up in Uluru, and so I was like, well, we have spare office space. How can we help? And I really wanted to help the Uluru Dialogue team that had hosted us in Uluru, because they'd also come and spoken to us at Telstra the year prior, and I had resonated with their style and their vision and goals as a group of female leaders. So then I started talking with the right people back at Telstra. In fact, in the airport at Uluru and from the press club in Canberra, because I was so enthusiastic about what I could do here. And I was encouraged, but also a little daunted that many of the suggestions that I had were already underway or had already been considered. So I'll just explain a little bit of Telstra's journey on this that I found out over the next few weeks. So first, our First Nations Directorate had been working on this for well over a year. So even before the Labor government came into power in May 22, Professor Davis and Auntie Pat had come to our Executive Leaders Forum and spoken to 300 of the senior leaders at Telstra about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and forecast the likely referendum, which they obviously knew was in the works, and educated us. And that was obviously a really impactful session for me. But then I realised that the First Nations leaders at Telstra had also organised conversations with Auntie Pat and Megan directly with the CEO, and they'd had conversations about this with the CEO, the leadership team of the CEO and our board, all in the lead up to preparing for the referendum, so that we knew once it was announced we would be ready. And this was because Telstra knew we wanted to have a leadership position on this, but we also knew it was going to be really complex to work through. When I first talked to our own internal comms person who'd been leading this, he told me in no uncertain terms that this was the most difficult issue he'd ever worked on. And so I needed to be a bit careful while I was trying to work out ways that we could help. So he explained to me that we already had some clear guidelines that Telstra and the board, in fact, had agreed to. And so I could work out how we could help, which was my enthusiasm following the trip. But I needed to work out how to work within those guidelines. And just to give you a few examples of what we'd agreed, Telstra was fully supportive, but the no-go zones were we didn't want to put our frontline teams at risk, and we didn't want to make the campaign about Telstra. It needed to stay focused on what the campaign was trying to achieve. So it was really important for me to strive that balance between listening and understanding what the Uluru campaign needed and how we could be useful and helpful and not a hindrance, staying in touch with them as their needs evolved and momentum grew in the campaign, but then also translating that back to what was doable at Telstra and was the thing I wanted to do going to be aligned with Telstra's position on it. It was really great to do that work together with the women from the study tour who were working on the Women for the Voice campaign that we then had, because we were from 65 different places, right? And if all of us had separately tried to help the campaigns, it would have been messy. And so the fact that we'd committed to work together collaboratively helped. And then I could also bounce ideas off with other women like Vanessa and other organisations and then test it back with Telstra. And that helped me be able to keep pushing the boundaries gently on what Telstra could do. And then back inside Telstra, I spoke to our First Nations leader about this, Lauren Ganley. She said that she'd been working on this for years, obviously, but I obviously came with enthusiasm, but also I was able to use my networks at Telstra to get a lot more done. So I could find people who could donate devices, vehicles for regional campaigns, space in buildings, and then build an army of collaborators to support the campaign. It was also clear, though, that it would be a very senior decision and debate, as in what exactly Telstra could do to help. And so I needed to keep working within the guardrails and keep keeping the CEO informed. This was my first foray into supporting any kind of vaguely political campaign, even though I like to argue this is about human rights, not politics. So it was quite a lot for me to learn. I might just share a couple of quick insights on some really important moments to just leave you with some thoughts. And the first was that on such a big issue as this, the specifics really matter. And in order to get the CEO to make a decision, I had to get down to brass tacks. So I really had to answer questions like, how many phones are we talking about? How many desks? How much media space do we need to help with? Because to make a decision, we obviously needed to be able to quantify it. Secondly, to help educating Telstra's staff, I had to take the first step myself. So I started telling stories about my trip in my acknowledgements of country, and then people started inviting me to go and do more acknowledgements of country because they heard stories about the stories I was telling. And then I was invited to be part of the storytelling sessions that we'd started having monthly and then weekly, and then even host an all hands to our whole organisation with Sally Scales, who'd been on the trip with us, to share it. So I started a fairly organic approach by being open about my own story. And then finally, I enlisted a group of about 40 other women execs at Telstra to join our movement. And this was initially because I didn't want it to just be my voice that people heard speaking about this, but I also wanted those women to need to educate. They all knew they were supportive, but I wanted them to have gone through the experience I had gone through of educating yourself sufficiently that you could speak about this topic. So I started the group by approaching all those women one by one. Obviously, I only asked the women who I felt like I had a trusted enough relationship with. And then once we had a quorum, I started a group chat for people to share ideas and support each other. That group became so important because each one of them found different ways to help in the lead up to the referendum, both in their teams at Telstra, but also externally with their families, with their own social networks. And a whole bunch of them ended up volunteering for the referendum, and therefore we all started having pretty confronting experiences as time went on. And again, Lauren Ganley, our First Nations leader, just told me that when she was finding they're going tough in those few weeks in the lead up to the referendum, she would come back and read the team's chat that we were all on to get comfort from the support of the other women at Telstra. So overall, I think this approach really reinforced that one individual can have a really big impact inside a big company if you find ways to use the scaled network that you can on such an important topic. And then finally, I'll wrap just by reminding us all that I was only able to do all of this because we as a group on the study tour had taken time to go and listen to the voices of the First Nations leaders who were trying to drive change here. And because we spent time with them listening, we could learn what was going to be helpful to them.
That's a wonderful summary, Jo, and I think it's a great example of how the spark of taking time out to listen, to reflect, to get involved very deeply with very complex issues outside of a corporate environment can change your thinking, and also a great example of how you've been able to take that back into your organisation and affect change, and also learn how to affect change within that. I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on the implications for industry from a broader perspective and our Women for the Voice initiative. So when we came back from Uluru, we'd formed a strong relationship with the Uluru Dialogues, and all of the women wanted to help, like Jo mentioned. But obviously, we learnt pretty quickly that having 65 of us trying to help a campaign was very overwhelming for the leaders of that campaign and not particularly effective. And the main insight with the referendum was that while we wanted to help our First Nations leaders in the campaign that they were doing, this was also our country and our constitution, and a referendum that we had a stake in. So in our discussion with Professor Megan Davies, the outcome really was, look, why don't we just do our own thing? Why don't we form our own coalition to help? And the First Nations leaders were really supportive of that because they felt like they were carrying a lot of the responsibility for the campaign, and to have advocates to be able to take their own view forward was very helpful, and to amplify that, as well as the practical support we provided them. So we took it into our own hands. We formed Women for the Voice in June 2023. All of the women, Jo's got her T-shirt on. And the goal was really to provide moderate, factual and rational contribution to the voice debate. Our insight was we could see as women that women play a very important role in their families, in their communities, in their workplaces, and in our country, in educating and informing the people around them around issues that are critical. And many of us were mothers, all of us were in workplaces and felt very strongly about the upcoming referendum. And our campaign wasn't about voting yes or no, that was being done by others, but our campaign was to ensure that we did everything we could so that when our communities went to the referendum, they went in a way that was informed and educated. And it was an important role. So We launched formally in September and ran through to the referendum. We've built a community on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok of over 10,000 supporters. We raised $1 million for the Uluru Dialogues through dinners, fundraising dinners that we organised as well. And most importantly, we harnessed our first-hand knowledge of the Uluru Dialogues from the study tour that we did to share that as part of the campaign. As we're all aware, the referendum wasn't successful in the final vote. However, we are really confident, certainly from our group, that there was the ability to make a very significant difference within our communities to support a more moderate and a factual and an informed debate around that, and a lot of support for women in the voice came from that as well, and the need, I guess, to have a strong voice in issues that impact us. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. A few more images there, Professor Measing and Davies in our T-shirt, and also a wonderful webinar that we held about a week out from the referendum that attracted over 600 women to come in and share their stories and share their voice. So I'll leave it there and leave a little bit of time for questions, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Jo and Vanessa. And what a fantastic opportunity. The comment by Jo really resonated with me, that just taking the time out and actually being an experiential learner, and that's what I probably would see myself. Quite often we're just so busy, we get torn into different areas, we constantly try to multitask, and it takes that opportunity to really take you away from your day-to-day life, to put you somewhere else, to actually force you to just be and to just observe rather than trying to do too many things. And I think that's where technology actually, or the lack of technology, once you go further away from our metropolitan areas, really comes in as an advantage, because it forces us to just be and actually listen. And that's one of the things I really love about going for us mainly north, and just getting away from it all and just being in that spot. I'm just wondering if there's some other questions coming through at this point in time, or if you've just simply blown everyone away. Having another look. Everyone, please keep your questions and comments come through via the Q&A section or the chat function. I also wanted to ask, so you've got this, obviously, your experience is not that long ago, but quite a lot has happened since then as well. So what are the next steps? So what's next for your project, and where are you going to take this amazing network of women?
That's a wonderful question, Katerina. The referendum was just less than 2 weeks ago, so all of us are having a rest at the moment. It was a very emotional and very energetic time, and putting our support around the First Nations women leaders who are also having a rest and regrouping. However, we are going to carry that community forward. We do feel that there is an appetite in Australia to continue what we started there in terms of collecting women's voices, acknowledging the role that they play in influencing their communities. Our group is apolitical, it's not aligned with anybody, it's not funded by anybody, so it does have a very objective and very independent role to play, and among the 65 of us, we reach a lot of people and are scaling that. So Women for the Voice has rebranded as Women's Voices. The assets are still there online, and we will be back.
Fantastic. Yeah, sorry, Jo.
From a Telstra perspective, there's a couple of things we're doing. So the 40 women that I mentioned had kind of joined the movement within Telstra have already spontaneously, without me, said they want to keep working on how we help educating people at Telstra around Aboriginal culture and why voice is important. And doing things like helping make sure that our Reconciliation Action Plan is as ambitious as it can be, and doing what we can to help implement it. So I think that's really important to remember. 5.5 million people voted yes, and that's a pretty powerful group of people to keep driving the movement of listening to First Nations people and learning about their culture. So we'll definitely be continuing that.
And that's an important point, Joe. We quite often forget, don't we? There are millions of people who did vote yes, and quite often in the wash-up, the focus is really just on the stats, and keeping in mind that a lot of those votes are still being counted. It's not going to change anything, but they're still being counted. Not everyone has been counted yet. So is the focus, though, to keep the focus on, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander voices and reconciliation, or have you got plans to kind of broaden out women's voices, or do you need the time to actually reflect and decide, where do we want to go as a group?
Yeah, we do need some time to reflect, and but I think the view is that there are many places that we can use that voice in a positive and constructive way as we move forward. So our heart will always be in the support of the Uluru Dialogues, and that we have a long way to go still with that campaign, and that will always be at the forefront of what we're doing. But we do think there is room to build on that in many other forums as well. We unfortunately saw some very negative and very unconstructive dialogue in the referendum campaign that we're also seeing in some of the other issues, such as the conflict in the Middle East at the moment. And we feel as a group that finding a forum for positive, factual, correct information and moderate and reasonable voices in those debates is going to be an important role that we can play.
Fantastic. I'm just having a look, please, if anyone's got any questions coming through. Otherwise, I'm just going to hop this space, because I'm just really interested. Are you planning on having organising another tour? That's one of the things I was thinking about. And the other thing, you might have mentioned, and apologies if I missed it, how were the women chosen? You mentioned that they were from a very diverse range of backgrounds and also professions and disciplines. So how were they selected in the first place?
Oh, great question. Well, the first thing is, yes, there is another tour planned, and it will be led by Elizabeth Broderick to the Great Barrier Reef in 2024. So I will share that with Priya. You might like to post it with this, and Trans-Tasman were very keen to pass it on to this network. So that will be next year's. And Joe, I don't know if you want to add how we were all chosen. I think it was, volunteers.
Yeah, it was a little bit of self-selection, a little bit of company selection. And obviously some corporates have programs where people were chosen to go on this. But just for myself personally, a colleague of mine who'd been the prior year had loved it so much that she had passed it on to me and asked me if I'd be interested in going. And so now I'm working with her for the Great Barrier Reef tour to work out what should we do? How many people can we try and encourage to go from Telstra, and how do we choose the right people? Because I think it's really important in this space that we get leaders from across the organisation engaged in ESG related topics, not just because quite a few of the people on the tour were from the sustainability part of the organisation. And I really truly believe that to drive environment, sustainability and governance related affairs into corporates effectively, more people than just the Chief Risk Officer or the Chief Sustainability Officer need to start taking the time to care about those things as well.
Yeah, and ESG is an interesting space because Australia is a little bit late to the party, certainly compared to Europe when you see what's happening there. But also our kind of ESG dimensions are quite different to what we kind of see and modeled everywhere else. So we don't want to do painting by numbers. We actually want to get it right and make sure it's relevant. So fantastic. Look, in the interest of time, and given that we've got a second presenter, I might leave it here. I can imagine that others will be reaching out to you for more information. You've got this fantastic report on the whole project as well, and it might be worthwhile to see if we can make that available as well alongside the recording of this presentation. So thank you very much to Vanessa and Joe, and I think you've inspired all of us this morning or this afternoon. The great thing is that our second presentation from Shima Sanyo from RMIT University is actually adding to this discussion as well. So Shima is a lecturer at RMIT and a PhD student at the University of New South Wales, and her research is very much within non-profit public relations. What she will be presenting today is an empirical study that looks at how corporate social advocacy was actually used by universities within the context of the voice debate, and it was quite a hot topic. So I'm personally really looking forward to Shima's insight. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Can you see my slides? Excellent. So as you mentioned, my topic is an analysis of corporate political advocacy by Australian universities around the Indigenous voice to Parliament, and it is still a work in progress. I would like to thank Priya for giving me this opportunity to present my work in progress. I would also like to thank the participants and audiences, especially my colleagues who are here to support me. I'm Shima Sani'i. This is one of my few engagement with Priya, and I hope that this is a start for further engagements with Priya. I'm also a PhD. I'm a lecturer at the RMIT University, and I'm also a PhD student at the University of New South Wales. My PhD thesis is actually very different from this topic. It is on how activist groups build their communities and develop their networks. So this topic is new to me, and I'm out of my comfort zone. So I really appreciate your ideas and comments about my work. I would like to acknowledge Wurundjeri people at the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land which the RMIT University stands. I respectfully recognize elders past, present, and future. The aim and rationale for my research is to explore the Australian university's position on the referendum. And it was a very appealing topic for me because we can see a lot of Indigenous symbols and artworks in university physical spaces and online spaces. We can see that universities encourage their members to do acknowledgement of country. We can see respect for Australian Indigenous cultures in universities' institutional values. And also we can see a support for Indigenous communities and First Nations peoples in universities' plans, for example, reconciliation action plans or their strategies. So it was very interesting for me to see how universities respond in a situation where we are talking about a tangible change, a constitutional change, how the universities responded in this situation. My core concept is, of course, corporate social advocacy. This concept was presented to public relations mainly by Dodd and Supa in 2014. And they refer to this concept as organizations when organizations and companies making public statements or taking public stance on polarizing social and political issues. Of course, the topic is not new. It is a business concept, but Dodd and Supa in 2014 conceptualized this concept as a public relations concept. They outlined three main characteristics for corporate social advocacy, which somehow distinguishes corporate social advocacy from corporate social responsibility. These three notions or characteristics are that corporate social advocacy is not necessarily related to the business of organizations. It can be distant from what organizations are doing. And it can be controversial and polarizing. So it is very likely to have financial outcome for organizations. Because of their focus and their because they highlighted the financial outcomes of corporate social advocacy on organizations, many of studies on corporate social advocacy or corporate political advocacy, they have focused on how for or against positions have impacted organizations' bottom line or organizations' constituencies, for example, their behaviors, their attitudes. but there are not much research on how the communication of these positions actually impact society. Ashby and King argues that few scholars have actually focused on how the way organizations communicate about their position actually supports an ideology or challenges an ideology. And this is my position. Specifically, Ashby and King did a very similar study on the US universities regarding Black Lives Matter. And he argues that those statements that are value-based, they are reinforcing the whiteness ideology because they are supporting the status quo. Also, those statements that focus on personal accountability and individuals' responsibilities, they also reinforce the whiteness ideology because they are highlighting individualistic ideas, and they assume that individuals have equal opportunities to information and opportunities. He also argues that those statements that give prominence to marginalized communities and also highlight institutional action to address the issue, those statements are actually challenging the whiteness ideology. My research was inspired by Ashby King research. My working in progress questions are: one, how did the Australian universities communicate about their position on the Indigenous voice to Parliament in their public statements? I think this is very in line with Vanessa's notion about the position is not simply just yes and or no position, but there are more nuances. And the second research question is about how did the Australian universities' communication frame the Indigenous voice to Parliament or the Indigenous issue? I focused on 41 Australian universities and specifically on their public statements. I used critical thematic analysis, which includes two main processes: one inductive process of open coding and identifying the themes from the data, and second, it includes a deductive process, which is about using a theoretical framework to categorize the identified themes and to analyze how those themes have reinforced or challenged certain ideologies. So as I said, this is a work in progress. I haven't decided on a specific theoretical framework yet. So I really appreciate your ideas and comments and recommendations regarding what theoretical framework might fit into this context. Here are some preliminary findings. So, of course, the majority of universities expressed their support for the yes position, while a few chose to adopt a neutral stance. For those who chose the neutral stance, we cannot say that they didn't take a position because they had a public statement that implied their neutrality. And of course, if the universities didn't have a public statement, they were still questioned by their stakeholders and publics. For example, at a town hall meeting, there was a question from the RMIT leaders that why you haven't chosen a side on the voice. So although those universities have taken a neutral stance, this is a legitimate stance. We cannot say that they haven't taken any stance. They have taken a neutral stance. Second, among those universities that expressed their support for the yes position, some of them supported the yes campaign institutionally as a university, but some of the universities took a more conservative approach. They articulated their statements on behalf of the leadership team. Also, the majority of the universities align their yes position with their values, strategies, and plans. And this is in line with Ashby King's notion that when universities are actually referring to their current missions and strategies, that they are reinforcing the current ideologies, the current situation, the status quo. And finally, among those that endorse the yes position, there was an effort to strike a balance between their stance and an acknowledgement of the diversity of perspectives among their students and staff. Here are some examples of neutral statements. For example, this is the Bonds University statements. As you can see, the main responsibility that is framed for the university here is to facilitate discussions and conversations. Also, the university, this statement holds individuals responsible regarding the referendum. And it highlights the current mission of the university. So taking Ashby King's argument, we can say that it is actually reinforcing the current situation, the status quo, by referring to individuals' responsibility and highlighting the connection of highlighting that they're not changing anything, but they're continuing what they were doing already. Here is another neutral statement from the RMIT University that we can say that it almost holds individuals responsible for the outcome. So it encourages individuals to reflect and engage with the conversation. And in the final sentence, it says, our hope is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have a greater influence in political decision-making regarding their social, spiritual, and economic well-being, which is quite vague. It doesn't clarify how this can happen. And this is the last example of a neutral statement from the ACU University, which frames the referendum as a very complex debate to justify their neutral position. So this is a very culturally sensitive issue, and there are very diverse perspectives. So we should center First Nations voices, which, if you want to adopt Ashby King's argument about centering marginalized voices as a symbol of challenging the current ideology, we can say the same for this sentence. However, as Vanessa said, this is a referendum. This is not just a group's, for example, First Nations people's responsibility, but this is a national responsibility. Among those statements that endorse the yes position, we can also see a lot of nuances. For example, the majority of them had framed the yes position as the enactment of the older statement from the heart. A few of them framed the yes position as a step towards social justice and self-determination. I think just one of them framed the yes position as a way to address our nation's colonial past. One statement highlighted that the yes position is not a perfect answer. We should not be perfectionists in this regard, and this is just a starting point. And another idea within those statements that reinforce the yes position is that this is not a veto decision and it cannot block laws. So they were minimizing the risk perception. So these were just some preliminary findings, but there are more nuances to the rhetoric of these statements. So my next step in this research is to explore a framework that I can use to analyze these themes, these nuances, to say which were appropriate in this context and which were actually reinforcing the marginalization of First Nations people. Also, so far, I have focused on their statements before the referendum, but the universities have statements regarding the referendum outcome, which I think should be taken into consideration in this research. So I'm going to capture them as well. My research has also of course, some limitations. I focused on universities' public statements. So I didn't capture their contribution entirely. For example, my research does not capture the contribution of the RMIT Fact Lab, which was committed to ensuring the voice referendum was not derailed by false and misleading information. Also, my positionality as a non-Indigenous researcher may influence how I interpret and make sense of the data. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any ideas about the framework or my research, I really appreciate that. To be here or later through my email, and this is my email, please feel free to send me an email if you have any ideas. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Shima. And everyone, please keep your questions coming through the chat or the Q&A. No, it's an issue very close to my heart, and I'm quite interested to hear about your PhD project as well, because that very nicely aligns with my own PhD research and my interest around activism and creating communities and activists as communicators. Really fascinating, because in the universities were very, very vocal. Well, some of them are very, very vocal in the lead up to the referendum. And then, of course, it got a bit quieter like it did on the corporate front. And I also thought it was really interesting to see the number of universities that either decided to stay neutral or to wait until like a few days out. And I think there were a couple that said, we're not only going to make our position public a few days out from the referendum, really trying to just tap into the public sentiment, which undermines the whole idea of making a public statement. And I remember reading a comment at the time saying not having a position is a very strong position in itself. It doesn't mean you're going to be apolitical in that space. Look, I'd be really interested in how you're going to capture those post statements, and I'd be really interested to hear if they're going to be as many as the kind of first round of statements in support. And of course, they were very skewed towards support. The other observation I have in that space is that certainly from our perspective at Curtin, there wasn't another public statement, but the statement that was made consequently was actually done to staff. So it might be quite interesting to tap into I know the fact lab is something entirely different, but being able to tap into internal communication somehow, how that was actually done, the university's position was kind of communicate to staff pre and post, would actually be quite interesting to see. There's just some of my comments. Have we got some more comments coming through? Have you just blown them all away? I don't know. Everyone is very quiet this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Katrina. They were great ideas.
Yeah, Joe's got a question. Joe?
Hello, can I ask a question?
Yeah, you've got access to the microphone, which is a bonus. Please be together. There you go.
Shima, I'm interested if your PhD wants to include corporates, because then maybe we should have a chat about how Telstra could help as well.
Yes, my PhD is very close to the submission phase, so it's almost completed. But of course, I didn't realize this during my PhD until now, that what my findings can actually inform organizations and non-activist organizations and corporations as well. For example, at university, we put a lot of emphasis on strategic planning, communication planning, but not much on community building. So I really hope that my findings can inform public relations in more broadly, not just activist organizations or on NGOs, but also corporations.
Yeah, and I think particularly with the learnings from the voice, I might connect you with our lead who I mentioned earlier in my talk. My other question, though, based on a debrief we had internally at Telstra, is: do you think taking a position from the universities actually changed the vote of the communities of the universities? And I'm not sure you can ever look at that, but I don't know if there is any way to do research on that.
I personally think that the university's position were very much in line with the majority of academics' position. So I'm not sure if there is the university have influenced the staff's position on the voice. But it can be a very interesting research, especially in the context of internal communication that Katerina mentioned earlier.
Well, yeah, and again, just to link it back to corporates, I'm sure that the demographic of a corporate is definitely not aligned with the demographic of Australia, but it's probably more diverse than the demographic of a university community. So, food for thought.
Yes, and I'm of course very biased towards humanities staff's position, so I might not be entirely correct, but in humanities, because we have a critical point of view, I think the majority of views was aligned with the yes position.
Well, but also higher education already was correlated, even at a population level, with the yes vote. So anyway, there you go. Sorry, I'll give back the mic.
I normally refer to that as my little bubble, because I don't know, everyone's it's very rare that in a university environment someone kind of comes out of left field. Quite often you expect that within certain contexts, but it's quite a safe space to actually make a statement. It's actually more controversial not to make a statement, I think, within that context, which might be something worthwhile looking into, Shima. What are the impacts of those that decided not to actually make a public statement? You could look at, you could certainly go and actually start surveying and speaking to individual academics at the universities, but that would create a really big project in itself if you actually try to, and I'm not a quant person, but you could obviously do some modelling there, or at least get some qualitative insights as well from some of those. So really exploring it further. Fantastic, and thank you for your comments there, Joe. And I hadn't really thought about that. It's really interesting comments around community building. We quite often forget, quite certainly from a research perspective, there's kind of quite often a disconnect between activists and community advocacy on one hand, and then corporations. But there's a lot we can learn from each other, really, and we should, rather than just silencing each other. It's used to be the traditional kind of position, at least in the literature. In the interest of time, because we spot on 1 hour, have we got any more questions coming through? I've got one more question. I think Fang's got her hand up there, so I'm trying to see, but I'm not sure if you got access to the microphone. Have you got access to the microphone, Fang? Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes. So my actually Leah. So my name is am I be able to put the cameras on? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We need Maddie for that because Maddie is in charge of all
Ah.
the
I
all the
don't think
technology.
so. As a panelist, I don't think so. It's only the
Oh, okay.
microphone.
Okay, sure. So, hi, Shima, Leah here, your colleague. So,
Hi, Leah.
so the name it came out with my Chinese name. So I think your presentation and your research topic is so timely, and it's also very significant in advancing the area of social corpus advocacy. But at the same time, it's also a very complex research topic. So just now, I just reflect on Joanna talk about a demographic in a certain group. So within the Australian context, like Australian universities, for academic, especially academic working at Australian universities, maybe it's worthwhile to look at what their positions look like. Like this sort of demographic may have some trend in terms of more liberal or left or right wing. So if we can tackle this, then that means when you interpret the finding, it may have some more insights. And also, when you present those examples, so when I look at it, I interpret the results may not be the same, like how it's interpreted by other researchers like you. So I'm thinking like in this particular research topic, when you generate your examples, and then it's actually, it may be another extended step that is to have different interpreters to see how they understand those statements, you know? So because I'm thinking about like a corporate social advocacy, the struggle there is that how an organization voice their view and at the same time also ensure fairness and diversity of staff members' views. So just now when you show the examples, and I can see that some of the examples I couldn't remember from which of the university, and you also mentioned this, they try to keep a balance about the diversity as well. So it seems like there's a kind of strategic indication there. They try to take this kind of exercise as a way to voice the organization position and position in a particular point, but they may not directly relate to yes or no in terms of the voting decision. It may relate to the decision supporting First Nation, but may not directly relating to the results or decision for employees or organization to vote. So I'm just thinking something is quite subtle there. Anyway, that's just my feeling, and then it may not be correct.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Maya.
Yeah.
Look, I apologize in the interest of time, because I know a lot of people are starting to drop off, unfortunately, because our time is up. I'd like to wrap this up, but hopefully we can continue these conversations. I'd certainly be interested in it, and the way it sounds like a lot of other people on this call, and who might actually watch back later on, will be really interested in continuing this conversation as well at various levels. So without further ado, I'd like to really thank our presenters. I'd like to thank Vanessa and Joe, and I'd also like to thank Shima. And please reach out to the presenters directly if you like to. The presentation will be recorded and up on the Priya YouTube channel. And otherwise, we see you back for next month Rescom, which will be focused all around Measurement Month. So we see you back there.